There have been numerous accounts through the years of disastrous shipwrecks dating back a millennia, but some have stood out as being particularly horrific. The Titanic sank in a catastrophic manner, killing over 1,000 passengers in spectacular fashion. A day when the world truly stood still for the ship's crew, as well as the survivors dealing with the trauma of the tragedy when they arrived at shore. Some have stuck out, but nothing quite as horrific as the sinking of the Britannic. Some stories have stuck out, but nothing was quite as horrific as the sinking of the Britannic. The Titanic had two sister ships made in production by the famous White Star Line manufacturing company, operating out of the UK. It was the youngest to the RMS Olympic and the Titanic, beginning production in the winter of 1911. In terms of velocity, tonnage, and overall size, the Britannic surpasses her older sisters. After the sinking of the Titanic in 1912, many modifications were made to the ship during its production to make it more safe. As opposed to the Titanic, the Britannic had double its number in lifeboats and installed failsafes. It was cast as an Olympic-class ocean liner and was initially designed to be a transatlantic passenger liner. After being completed in 1914 in Belfast, UK, the start of World War II set the Britannic on a different type of path. The ship would ultimately operate as a hospital ship in 1915 for the Royal Navy during the war. The Britannic completed 5 successful voyages through the Middle Eastern theater, sailing back to the UK, transporting sick and wounded soldiers fighting in the war. Her 6th voyage would be her last. On the Aegean Sea, near the Greek island of Kea, the Britannic would meet her fate in November of 1916. After sailing through this small channel, the ship struck a German sea mine that had been planted by U-boats, despite arguments that mines weren't allowed to be placed in the area due to the terms of war. The explosion to the front starboard side of the ship shook the decks of the large liner violently. Everyone was in a panic running to their posts, but it was unclear if it was a mine or an enemy torpedo. The decks were in a haze. The crew took charge and assessed the situation. The first 4 watertight compartments were filling with water rapidly, with boiler rooms heavily damaged. Captain Bartlett ordered the doors to be sealed and the lifeboats to be prepared. The Britannic immediately sent out a distress signal to surrounding Allied ships, but heard nothing in reply. Captain Bartlett devised efforts to save the ship by getting it to land as fast as possible. He ordered the navigators to direct the ship to the nearest island of Kea. The front of the ship had already begun to dip as it was filling with water. The captain had the ship running at its maximum speed as the propellers drove the ship closer and closer to land. The lifeboats had been prepared, but Bartlett had not yet given the order for them to be lowered. While the captain continued his desperate maneuver, fear wreaked havoc on the decks of the ill-fated ocean liner. The passengers and crew were getting more fearful as the back of the ship lifted higher and higher. Passengers made the decision to drop 2 lifeboats on the port side of the sinking ship. This would ultimately be a grave decision, as the front of the ship had been dipping. Propellers were partially exposed. As the crew descended into the lifeboats, they were sure they had escaped the fate of the Britannic. The exposed propellers then sucked the lifeboats in, with the churning of the water, and the boats, along with the passengers, were sliced and dismembered by the high speed of the rotors. The sea turned red as 50 victims were cut into pieces in their desperate attempt to flee the sinking vessel. Torsos and body parts flooded the waters as passengers still aboard the ship had witnessed the gory massacre. The captain was completely unaware of what was happening at the time, and when he was informed of what had happened, he ordered the engines to be stopped. Survivors mounted the remaining lifeboats and rowed to the safety of the HMS Scourge that had come to aid the doomed ship. The ship was almost fully submerged as the captain walked off his deck and right into the water. 1,106 people survived as 50 lives were lost. The ship eventually capsized on its starboard side and sank in 55 minutes. The ship is still laid to rest over 100 years after the tragedy as a sunken grave for many of the victims. The sea still foamed blood red as the survivors were brought on board the rescuing ship. To this day, it is still regarded as one of the bloodiest shipwrecks documented. The survivors never forgot that day they survived the horrors and the massacre that happened. To date, all the survivors have since passed.